Alldus podcast is brought to you by Alldus International, supplying your expert AI and digital transformation staffing needs across the US and Europe. Today, you are listening to our AI in Action series, where leading minds in AI from across the world share their story, success, and advice. AI in Action cuts through the hype and explores the true impact of artificial intelligence in our world today.
You're listening to AI in Action. I'm your host, JP Valentine. Our guest today is Sujoy Ganguly. Sujoy is the CTO at Sports Info Solutions. Sujoy, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
So Sujoy, let's start with yourself, please, as we do with all of our guests. Could you give us an overview of your background in technology and what your journey has been from where you got started, some of the roles you've held along the way, and what's led you to where you are today as the CTO for Sports Info Solutions?
Yeah, absolutely. I'll try to keep this a bit abridged, as it's been a sort of long meandering career in some sense, but started life as an academic, as many people in AI did, working in, I actually come from a background in physics and applied math, and was working on all kinds of interesting problems of modeling and extracting data to validate models of transport phenomenon and growth and motility in many biological problems and physical problems. But during that time, one of the big things that I would end up doing a lot is extracting data from microscopy images. And during my postdoc at Yale, this sort of AI revolution kicked off with AlexNet in 2012. And around 2013-14, there was a lot of these nascent packages, your TensorFlow 0 point somethings, or Theano even, maybe people have heard of, which I think is dead by now, Cafe, and so forth, that were existing. And I started to use those to leverage and do computer vision for microscopy and biomedical imaging to extract data for models that I was building as a physicist. And that got me very excited about the potential of these sort of deep neural networks and their ability to do things that had been very hard to do previously, or either required a huge amount of manual work or very complicated heuristic algorithms. At the same time, I'm a sort of lifelong sports fan, and also was getting bored of doing, let's say, cellular or molecular scale work, and was very interested in trying to think about more human-human scale problems. And as my physicist brain will tell me, the hydrogen atom, as we say, the simplest version of human interactions is sports. And so started looking at, I wonder if anybody is doing like really cool analytics in sports. This was a naive thought in 2015, 2016. Turns out there's a huge number of companies that do that at really well. And I went to one of those called Stats Perform as they were building an AI group. This was the beginning of building AI groups. And went in there to do a number of projects with them, but really as their director of computer vision. So continuing the sort of computer vision story. There, I built a bunch of cool products and brought them to market in the sports technology space. As part of that, one of the things that we then start to understand is that data is the name of the game. Labeled data and access to large amounts of data is the name of the game in any part of AI, really. And in the problems that we were facing at Stats Perform, part of that was computer vision data, labeled computer vision data for player motions. And I thought, there are these great video games that have players moving around on the court all the time, and they look really high fidelity, your NBA 2Ks and your FIFAs at the time. And I thought, I wonder if anybody is doing anything to leverage those, and if I could partner with anybody to help build some synthetic data. And that got me Googling around, okay, who's doing this? And that brought me to Unity, who was just starting out a group just to do this. And they convinced me that, hey, instead of trying to be a partner, you sound like you would really be great as a person helping us build this. And so I went there to help build the synthetic data and computer vision systems for that. Did a lot of that at Unity. It was really, really fun. But I did have this itching feeling of unfinished business in the sports space as I kind of left 3/4 to maybe farther than that, 80% done in that Stats Perform. And so got tempted back after a number of fun years at Unity, building really cool synthetic data products and digital twin products and even generative AI products for video games, to come back and touch the sports stuff again here at SIS, which is what I'm doing now.
Amazing. Thank you so much for that, Sujoy. A fascinating background, particularly your conscious decision to pursue an industry that you are passionate about and you had interest in while
Yeah.
combining it with your own educational background. And obviously you can follow the dots from where you first got into where you are now, which is a great segue and leads us to the next part of the conversation. Tell us all about Sports Info Solutions, who you are, what you do, mission of the business, and then we'll jump into your role as the CTO.
We've actually been around for a number of years, but in the last few years have really tried to undertake a sort of transformation into a more technology-focused business. Historically, been around for 20 years, was originally called Baseball Info Solutions, and it's really a company that does data collection and analysis, particularly in what we call the team performance space, our side of the business, which is to say helping teams make better decisions by having better data and better ways to analyze that data. As technology, of course, the AI technology revolution has come for all businesses. It has come for the sports technology business. I was part of some of that at SaaS Reform. And here at SIS, that's what I was brought in to help drive forward, is a revolution in the kinds of data that we can manipulate and the kinds of ways we can manipulate them and the ways we can interact in the ecosystem. A little bit of color there. A lot of what we might call really granular raw data is actually collected by the leagues themselves, but that's not necessarily sufficient or useful in its nascent form. And so really we're trying to use sort of AI-driven systems combined with human expert systems to enable teams to use that data in the right context. So we have to contextualize it in the sports context. And I can get into way more detail about that in a second.
Yeah, let's jump straight into that. I think what would be good for the sake of our conversation here is a couple of examples of how the various leagues are taking their raw data, what you and Sports Info Solutions are helping them do, where AI is accelerating that. And ultimately, the most exciting part is what comes out the other side of that. What are some of the interesting and exciting use cases that you can share with us?
I'll start with a couple of the most interesting ones that we're doing right now in production, running today, and gives you a good example of the kinds of things that we're trying to do. In the NBA as a league has a league-wide deal with a computer vision provider to install cameras in their venues and track the 3D locations of every player and the ball at 60 frames a second in every game. And that is incredible computer vision technology that itself is driven by AI technologies. But in that form, just XYZ locations of people on a court and a ball, not a lot you can say on that data raw, right? Maybe you could talk about some load or something like that, but not a lot you can say. However, you can use that data, that spatial temporal tracking data, to then extract things like, when did a ball screen happen? Who was involved? Who was the ball handler? Who was the screener? Who was the screener defender? Who was the ball handler defender? What kind of defense was the defense playing? Were they doing a drop coverage? Were they blitzing the ball handler? When there was a closeout, was it a good closeout? Did somebody, when they drove to the bucket, did they end up with a floater? Did they end up going to a hook shot? When was there a post up? All of these very contextual sports type concepts can, of course, be derived from that XYZ data. And that's where Sports Info Solution shows up. We say we're going to take that raw information and we're going to try to contextualize it at many levels of granularity. So they can be from anything like what I've just said, which is the players involved, the locations they were at, and the event that was occurring. So this is sort of event detection or action recognition, we would call it. And that can have lots of different details. We also do things like try to evaluate the quality of those events, as well as the value of an event to scoring. So we can think of possession, what is the expected points that somebody would score given the way they're moving and where the ball is and how far the defender is. And we can even do credit assignment for, hey, though this point guard got the credit for scoring the point off a ball screen, that ball screener's excellent screen was critical to that, so there should be some credit assigned. And that's another layer of AI, in that case, almost reinforcement learning kind of concepts. So those are the sorts of things that we do by and large. We have a few other things where we have to go beyond the computer vision systems, but by and large, that's the kind of space we play in.
Makes sense.
Equivalent statements can be made in NFL and other sports, but that's the kind of idea.
You are listening to the Alldus podcast. When you're looking to scale your team, or if you are interested in showcasing your company in a future episode, reach out today. Or if you're in the market for a new role, visit our website to view open positions, www.alldus.com.
I want to spend some time understanding the makeup of the team. Obviously, you're overseeing the entire technology function, but you've got a talented team beneath you.
Yes.
Can you give us some insight into the size, the structure, the background of the individuals, a typical project lifecycle, really showcasing the various components of AI and data that's at play to allow you to work with these leagues and teams for these derived insights?
That's a great question. We have a great team that's underneath. So the AI team is about 6 or 7 people. They're about three-ish, and many people have blended roles, as many good teams do, particularly smaller teams. But we have 3-ish people who are data engineers, effectively, who are responsible for ingesting this very unstructured and high and large-scale tracking data, ingesting it, organizing it, preparing it. They're also responsible for helping us orchestrate a lot of our AI pipelines. Then we have machine learning engineers whose job it is to train models, deploy them in production. And then we have, and that's a core makeup of the team. We have a little bit of research we do as well, because we have certain unique problems that we need to explore. But by and large, we're machine learning engineers and data engineers working together. Typical project life cycle starts with the data, always and forever. How do we find the data? How do we collect the data? It's also important to note at Sports Info Solutions, I said we had human experts. We also incorporate, that doesn't report directly to me, but that's part of the pod we'll put together, is human experts who will help tag and label data. So if we want to have ball screens labeled, we need to have lots of supervised information around ball screens. And maybe not lots of, but we need at least some. And so our human experts will tag, these are all these ball screens, these are the quality of the nature of the coverages. This is a drop coverage. Here's an example of a blitz and so forth. And those are then used as our labeled data. So our data engineers are ingesting all of that together. We're organizing it. The machine learning engineers are working with them to make sure that's all organized. We're 100% cloud shop, like AWS shops. It's a lot of data engineering parts, a lot of Spark and Glue and things like that for the people who know what those things are, but large data processing systems. Machine learning we're a PyTorch shop currently. So we do all of our stuff with PyTorch and PyTorch Lightning. Training models, we use Batch and Spot to do a lot of our training so that we can keep our costs down in AWS. And we do a lot of our deployment. We use Triton inference servers currently. So we use a Triton style deployment. So that's a life cycle. It starts with the data. We then build the model. We validate its quality. We then put it in production and send it to customers. And then that's how we go. Yeah.
What are some of the differences in data challenges that you're facing compared to other organizations? Because the space you're operating in, it's unique, it's new, it's innovative. So there's not really a well-walked path. So what are you coming across that you and your team may not have met with on previous projects at previous organizations?
Yeah, a lot of times when I was doing more computer vision work, or even at Unity where we're doing some generative AI stuff or other things like that, there's a lot of ability to go to a foundation model or a model that exists in the academic community that is able to solve maybe not your exact problem. Maybe you need to fine tune it. Maybe you need to adjust it. Maybe you need to strip certain layers out and so forth. But things like representation are handled for you. A lot of the even ways of predicting are handled for you. In this space, though there are probably people who are working in similar problems, in the automotive industry, AV industry, that they aren't being super public about how they're solving those problems, so we can't go use anything open source. So we have a challenge, which is how do we effectively encode this high-dimensional spatial temporal data, where we have multiple players interacting, they're on different teams, they're moving around very quickly. Maybe we have posed data available to us in certain industries, sometimes we do not. And so That's our biggest challenge, is that our data modality is different. It's not just an image. It is not tabular data. It is unstructured data. It is not language data, right? It's not words that can be tokenized. Now, that being said, we can try to leverage some of the learnings from those other communities on how we should do this. But unfortunately, we can't just go pull it off the shelf like we could when I was doing computer vision problems.
Yeah, makes sense. I want to spend some time now, Sujoy, talking about what's next for the business. Obviously, it's an exciting space, and anyone who's been watching any sport, pick your sport of choice, you will have noticed in the last few years the integration of technology, particularly AI. That's just for the viewer. But then on the other side, the organizations, the leagues, the individual teams are leaning into this very heavily. So when you look at the near-term roadmap, what are some of the things that you're most excited about to work on, both SIS, but then also near-term possibilities as the technology continues to evolve?
So there are a few places that are starting to heat up here. One is in-game decision-making or live adjacent decision-making. As teams have gotten more and more comfortable looking at using this kind of data, they have had a desire to evaluate what's happening in the game. How are we doing on ball screens, on drop coverages against this player today? And what should we change? So they're looking at that kind of stuff. Shot quality metrics. Are we getting good shots, but just missing them? And therefore, it's going to even out in the long term. They're starting to want to look at these things in game, particularly in let's say you'll call them high frequency sports like basketball and baseball, where there's lots of events so that you in game, you have them. In sports like soccer / European football, not American football, that are lower frequency, only a handful of chances created in a game, that's a little different. The other big area that's always important in this space and will always be important, and an area that we play in as well, is injury and biomechanics. We collect injury data, very detailed data around what kinds of injuries and when people were injured and so forth. And people are very interested in understanding injury prevention, post-injury recovery, analysis that what's going to cause an injury, or try to get some predictability around that. Now, obviously, it's not really a predictable space, but to try to get some understanding of what they can do, that's always going to be a big, important space in sports. The old joke being the best ability is availability, right? If you're hurt, it doesn't matter how skilled you are. And then the other thing is data is becoming increasingly granular, right? Whereas a few years ago, even the idea of just center of mass of all the players was novel. Now we're at pose, 29 key points on a person's body, knowing we're in 3D. And immediately coming after that, we're seeing it start to heat up, which is full meshes and surfaces of people's bodies. So we're getting into that level of detail. As that gets more and more detailed, there is the need to contextualize more and more interesting things. This is opening up opportunities to start analyzing things that were hard to analyze before, like quality of defense, shooting mechanics. When we say it's a good shot, why did we miss? Did we miss because our elbow got flared out? Was actually that closeout so good that it rushed the shooter? These sorts of things are starting to come. And that's in the NBA, in baseball, the biomechanics of pitching, and is the person getting a sufficient extension today? That's huge. In American football, they're lagging a little bit behind in that it's much harder to get pose kind of data, but they're also climbing this ladder. So that's the three areas that are coming in big time. Yeah.
I want to finish the conversation on a message to potential future employees. Given this is at the very early stages of utilizing AI for this particular purpose in analysis of sports, we can only assume it's going to grow and continue and evolve. And the role that Sports Info Solution holds is being an early mover and adopter in the space. But to keep that position as a leader, you're going to need to grow and add more talent. So speaking to an audience of potential future employees, when you're talking to people about Sports Info Solutions, the environment, the mission, the product, the growth, what is it that you tell candidates that would get them excited enough to join you guys over some of the other great companies also trying to hire?
Part of our pitch is always around the unique problem space that we work in. There are other companies in sports data who are doing a lot of very good AI things. So I can talk about how I compete with those people. But if I'm competing against all other companies in the world, usually the sports angle is what's going to excite somebody to come. We have unique problem spaces. So if people are interested in that kind of issue, the sort of multi-agent decision-making in complex systems is pretty rare currently in AI. There's not a lot of people doing that. So we're unique if you're interested in those sorts of problems. But in the sense I said at the beginning of the podcast, like the simplest version of multi-agent interaction is sports or games. And then when talking to other sports providers, competing with other people in other sports, is that Sports Info Solutions has a specific focus on the three major US sports, so American football, basketball, and baseball, and have an interest in being deep in those sports. So our analytics and our data goes deep and gets into the very granular aspects of the game, whereas our competitors are more interested in having great breadth across many sports. And in that sense, they are not leveraging the most cutting edge data sources, and they don't have usually the annotation muscle that we have, an expert muscle that we have in the sport itself. So we have that sort of competitive advantage that we like to leverage when we can.
I love it.
Yeah.
And just to add to that, when you visualize the growth over the next few years, what types of positions do you foresee needing to hire for and add to the existing team?
For me, everything is about data. And so data engineering is one of our big areas that will probably end up growing. I think we're slightly underrepresenting our data, or we have excellent data engineers. And so we're relying on their natural multi-X multipliers, but I think that's not a fair expectation forever. And so that's a part as we want to build more and more models on more and more interesting areas, as the data is getting more and more complicated, data engineering, data organization, or data strategy becomes critical. And fundamentally, in so many ways, we are a data company. So our ability to deliver that data to our clients in a way that is most useful and valuable is fundamental. So that's one of the big areas. We also need to be thinking about how can we be intelligent about reusability in our unique data space in terms of machine learning models. So instead of building every model from scratch, end-to-end trained, we need to start getting into the space of how do we amortize some of those training costs, create those fundamental representations that we don't get from the market, but we need to build for ourselves inside the market. And so those are the two big areas for me that I see as critical. They're basically critical questions about how are we going to scale? We need to be able to ingest more types of data, deliver more types of data, and leverage more types of data quickly. And so that means we're thinking about encoding layers and representation layers, embedding layers, and how to ingest and move data quickly.
Sujoy, thank you so much for coming on today and talking to us. Really appreciate you sharing your background, giving us a great insight into not just your role, but the company as a whole, SIS. You're doing some fascinating stuff. And I know for anyone listening who is working in the world of AI, but is also a sports fan, this is a cool use of the technology. It's great to hear that it's a growing and evolving space. So for anyone listening who's interested in doing their day job, but in an industry that they love, Sports Info Solutions seems to be a place that we should be watching with great interest. So we wish you, the team, and everyone at SIS the very best of luck in the months and years to come, and look forward to having you back on the show again in the near future.
Absolutely. Thank you so much.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the Alldus podcast. If you enjoyed today's episode, don't forget to subscribe, rate, and review. We are available on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and any Android podcast of choice. You can also head over to our website, www.alldus.com, to listen to more podcasts, view our open roles, and stay up to date with industry news. Thanks for listening, and stay tuned for more great episodes coming very soon.